Israeli propaganda, don't believe any of it, and they all dismissed it. And I thought, oh no, I'm not making that mistake again. Because when I was a Maoist, I was saying to everybody who criticized China, oh, that's just nonsense, that's what we called back then, that's just bourgeois propaganda, that's all petty bourgeois propaganda, don't even look at it. And I ended up being wrong. So I decided, this time, I don't care what anyone says, I am going to go through that book, footnote by footnote, and it had 2,000 footnotes. I'm going to check every source to make sure that I'm right and she's wrong. Because if she's right and I'm wrong, I am out of here. Don't talk to me about Palestine, don't talk to me about Palestinians, don't talk to me about anything. I am not going to be made a fool of the second time in my life. But this time, to my good fortune, she was the liar, and the truth was on the side of the Palestinians. I went through it point by point, and then it's impossible to explain because you'd have to see the book. The book had some very complicated demographic material in it, which means population movements. And it had all these complicated charts. And I used to come home at night after work and sit down, lay down on my bed. I didn't use calculators. They weren't so popular back then either. So it was all with paper and pencil calculating. And one night, it was like 1 a.m. or 1:30. I'm lying in my bed, and I suddenly discover one of the key numbers in the chart, which proves her argument. One of the key numbers is fake. It was wrong. It was not true. That number was wrong. I can't tell you the feeling that came over me. It was like I was trembling, because this is a very important book, supported by the leading historians in the field. I lived in a very tiny little apartment in Washington Heights, for those of you who know it. By the way, all Dominican. If you love salsa, merengue is the place to move, especially if you like it 24/7, 365, especially if you like it coming out of every single window in your alley, especially if you like it, they play it loud enough so you can hear it in Santo Domingo, which is a perfect place to live, especially if you like da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, 24/7, 365. But okay, that's where I live. Small apartment, very cheap rent. Came free, about 1,000 cockroaches per square inch. It's 1:30 in the morning. I said, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. And I got up and I started to pace my apartment. I said, I did it. I did it. I did it. I discovered a fraud. It's unbelievable. And it's like now 1:30, 2 a.m. What am I going to do? I got to tell someone. Well, I'm George from Brooklyn, so of course. Who do you call at 2 o'clock in the morning? I called my mother. My mother gets up, I said, Mom, I did it, I can't believe I did it. She said, Norm, I'm so proud of you. So, what did you do? It's impossible to explain what I did, but believe me, it's good. And the reason it brings a full circle, and I went into this story, was after I discovered my little, and it wasn't so little actually, a fraud, then the question is, how do you get other people to acknowledge it? Because I'm a nobody. I worked in an after-school program with kids in the inner city. I had no work, virtually no income at that point in my life. That hasn't changed much. And so I sent out my findings to 25 of the top scholars in the country. And of the 25, 24 to this day, which is now, you can do the calculations, I'm talking about 1984. To this day, I never heard from them, 30 years later. But one morning, it was a Saturday morning, I get a phone call, and I pick up the phone, and I say, okay, who is this? And this person says, oh, this is Professor, this is Noam Chomsky. Really? Noam Chomsky calling Norman Finkelstein in Washington Heights. Yeah, I read what you wrote. And he says it sounds plausible to me, what you're saying. It sounds convincing, and we should look into it more. And of course, at that point in my life, Noam Chomsky's wish, i.e. you should look into more, becomes my command. And so for the next couple of years, I look into it, and it turns out the whole book was a fake, not just that one number, but everything was a complete fraud. I mention that because on the way here, John was saying how Professor Chomsky agreeing to be part of this series opened so many doors for him. And because other people can say to other people now, well, Professor Chomsky agreed to be in this. So they said, okay, well, if he agreed, I'll do it too. And it was the same thing with me. There are many things one can say in praise of Professor Chomsky, and I'm not here to sing these praises. Millions have already before me. But for me, the most important lesson was he didn't care what your credentials were. He didn't care where you taught. He didn't care where you got your PhD. He didn't care about any of that. He just examined the material, never asked you any background questions. If it's good, it's good. If it's bad, it's bad. He never cared about credentials. He, over time, became my closest friend now for some 30 years. I don't think he has even a clue where I went to college. You know what I mean? He just has no interest in it. And that was also a very important lesson for me, to learn to judge people as individuals and not judge them by their credentials. You can be teaching at a humble place like Cerritos College, and still be very impressive. And you can be a student here and have a lot of promise and a lot to offer. You just haven't had the chance. Some of you, on that note, I'll just mention, some of you, I suspect very few, but if you have a chance, because you're the web generation, go to YouTube and YouTube Susan Boyle, B-O-Y-L-E, Susan Boyle. How many of you know her? The thing that struck me about her was, for those of you raised your hand, her first opportunity, she's on stage, and she says, I want to be a Broadway performer. And one of the judges very skeptically says, well, why haven't you already been one? You're 47 years old. And her answer was, it was really deeply true. She said, I was never given a chance. She was not a particularly attractive woman. She came from very humble background. Apparently she had some serious learning disabilities in school. She said that her music was a refuge because she was always ridiculed because of her learning disabilities. But she had a wondrous voice. She never had a chance. And, I'm sure it's true of a lot of you here. If you're given a chance, let yourself be mentored by a caring teacher. You too can go places. Especially if you're around people who don't look for your credentials, don't ask what college you went to, where did you get your PhD, how many books have you published, who published the books. Just looks at you, judges you for who you are. And that's what Professor Chomsky did for me, and it was a blessing in my life. Thank you.
All right, I have a couple of your books here, and somehow I want to connect the books. And I thought about that a little bit, and I thought I have a kind of rapid questions here. You have written that the American-Jewish romance with Israel is coming to an end. What evidence is there that the American Jews are distancing themselves from Israel?
The main evidence is you have to start from the basic sort of bottom line. American Jews are overwhelmingly liberal. They tend towards the left liberal end of the political spectrum. So in the 2008 election, when President Obama ran for office, between 75 and 80% of American Jews voted for him. That was, except for African Americans, where the figure was about, the percentage was about 94. Apart from African Americans, Jews were the highest percentage voted among ethno-religious groups for Barack Obama. There are a lot of Latinos in this audience. I think you'll be surprised to learn in the first election, about 63% of Latinos voted for Obama. Among Jews, it was between 75 and 80%. So Jews are overwhelmingly liberal, but what's more important is Jews are by far the richest ethno-religious group in the United States. They're the wealthiest. So we all know the Republicans' party is the rich person's party. So Jews are so rich, they should be voting Republican, but they don't. They vote overwhelmingly Democratic. And the same thing happened in the last election. In the last election, a lot more Latinos voted for Obama. That was because of the immigration issue, where the Republican Party was, as in most issues, completely lunatic. So they went and voted Democratic. But even in the last election, the Prime Minister of Israel, a fellow named Benjamin Netanyahu, and he was going around saying, Obama's bad for the Jews, you gotta vote for Romney, Obama's bad for Israel, you gotta vote for Romney, vote for Romney, vote for Romney. And then the election happens, and what happens? Even though the Prime Minister of Israel is saying, vote for Romney, Obama's bad for the Jews, 70% of American Jews still vote for Obama. They don't care what the Prime Minister of Israel says. They are liberal. And the simple basic fact is it's very hard to be liberal in American society. Liberal means you believe in equality before the law, you believe in the rule of law, you believe in international institutions like the United Nations, you believe in the peaceful settlement of conflicts using diplomacy, not war. That's what American Jews believe. It's very hard to believe all those things and support Israel. It's just not possible. The way Israel carries on, the way Israel conducts itself. When I was growing up, there are some people in the room who are roughly my age cohort. Sort of the sentiment of our generation was, all we are saying is give peace a chance. All we are, how many of you know it? Okay, so when I say 3, 1, 2, 3. All we are saying is give peace a chance. It was first said by John Lennon in 1969 in an anti-war rally in Washington, and then it became the credo of our generation. So most Jews are liberal. Most Jews were part of that anti-war movement. Most Jews were part of that generation. And so now they've come of age. They're like some of the people who were singing along. And now you have this country which is saying, all we are saying is give war a chance, and give war another chance, and give war another chance, and give war another chance. Well, if you grew up with the sentiments of the 60s, it's very hard to reconcile the way Israel carries on. It's become, and I don't say this happily, and I don't say it gleefully, but it's become like a vampire state. They have to have a war every few months. Every few months, you have to attack Gaza again. If you're not attacking Gaza, we have to talk about attacking Lebanon. And if we're not attacking Lebanon, we have to talk about attacking Iran. It's a completely lunatic state. And it's very difficult for Jews, with their liberal values, their liberal sentiments, to reconcile their beliefs, their credo, their ethos, their past, their youth, with the way this state carries on. And that, in my opinion, is the main reason why now a gap is opening up between the feelings of American Jews regarding Israel.
You see that gap, if I understand you correctly, is something that could be very, very positive. And could you elaborate a little bit on why that might be a positive movement?
You know, because the American Jews have clearly been a a major obstacle to resolving the conflict. They are rich, they are powerful, they are articulate, they are organized, and in this particular issue, they're on the wrong side. And if you're rich and you're powerful, you're articulate, you're organized, you're aggressive, and you have no compunction about smacking down your opposition, sometimes using very ugly tactics, then you become an obstacle. And I think there's a possibility now that American Jews will cease to be an obstacle and hopefully will become a powerful force for good. Now that doesn't mean you're calling on American Jews to hate Israel. And it doesn't mean you're calling on American Jews to root for Israel's destruction. It has nothing to do with that. You're asking American Jews to just be fair. Just be reasonable. Just take those principles that you articulate in your daily life, your values, your liberal values, and just apply them to yourself. Now, everybody knows it's very much easier to be moral or passing moral judgments on others than it is applying those same morals to yourself. It's much easier to tell other people that's you're doing that, what you're doing is wrong, what you're doing is wrong, and to say yourself, hey, what I'm doing is wrong. So it's a challenge for all of us. But the basic thing is you're simply asking Israel, American Jews, take the same values you apply in every other situation, the values of fairness, the values of equality, the values of using diplomacy, not force. Let's take those same values and apply them to the state of Israel. And let's find a resolution finally to this conflict based on those same values. Not on hateful values, on values of fairness, truth, justice. Those are the right values. Just be fair. And we will resolve the conflict.
You say here that American Jews have an opportunity to right a double wrong, the horror inflicted on Palestine and damage to Israel. And I think this might be a good segue to what Gandhi says, because you said that Palestinians don't really have a military option. And you make a comparison in your book between Gandhi's attempt to end British occupation with the Palestinians. You talk a little bit about how you see the tactics of Gandhi working for Palestinians.
Well, let's start from the beginning. Gandhi's tactics cannot work everywhere, and that's clear. You take a place like, there's a very nice Indian writer, talented Indian writer, her name is Arundhati Roy. How many people have heard of her? Raise your hand. Good. So Arundhati Roy, she goes into the forests in central India, and horrible things are going on. Massive land clearings by the Indian army, wiping out populations, and an armed resistance has developed by the way it happens, by Maoists, Naxalites. And so Arundhati Roy tries to be on the side of nonviolence, Gandhian sort of tactics, but she says it's not going to work there because nobody cares what happens in the forest inside India. The army goes in, slaughters 2,000 people, leaves. Does anybody know? Well, you don't know. How can you care? But there are some situations where you can say sort of the national spotlight is focused on it. It was the case, for example, in the United States during the Civil Rights Movement. Everybody's watching what's going on there. And then there are limits. There are limits to what the wrong side can do. It doesn't mean they can't kill at all. They kill. Doesn't mean they aren't very brutal. They are brutal. The American South was a very mean place during those years. And they were determined to uphold what they called that Southern way of life. And that Southern way of life meant things like, these black kids are not going to school with our kids. That was out. But there were limits to what they could do because of the cameras, the attention, the world attention on what was going on in the American South. And so the nonviolent strategy could work. And I think it also could work because to the good fortune of Palestinians, and certainly they haven't had much